Morning. Thank you for joining us on another webinar for South Dakota Specialty Producers Association. My name is Melissa Niles. I am the Urban Ag Liaison for the Specialty Producers Association. Thank you for joining us for starting a large-scale composting operation with guest Jayne Merner from Earth Care Farm out in Rhode Island. This webinar has been funded under the Conservation Collaboration Agreement between the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association, SDSPA, to promote sustainable agriculture practices and environmental stewardship. Its contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the USDA or NRCS. You are welcome to check out more out our guest at her website, earthcarefarm.com. Good morning, Jayne.
Hey, thanks, Melissa. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. We are excited to learn about large-scale composting facilities.
Great. Yeah, I'll introduce my facility a little bit. This is a picture actually of where I am right now. I'm in the middle of this facility today where I'm speaking from you in this house right here. As I look out the window, I'm watching a tractor trailer truck dump some manure and bedding from our local zoo, struggling to get it out because it's a little frozen today. But just a little bit of history. This farm was started by my father 48 years ago, back in the 70s, and I've been running it for the past 8 years. We're considered a smaller, large-scale facility. We're kind of on the smaller side. But at the same time I'm running this site in Rhode Island, I'm starting a second facility in Connecticut. So I'm very fresh into the process of starting a large-scale compost operation, and also running one that's been running for a long time. So there's a lot to cover, and I'm sure each person is going to have different ideas of what they'd like me to delve into more. So please don't hesitate to reach out afterwards if there's a topic you want me to delve into more, because I love talking about compost. One thing I'll just point out about this picture over here is you'll see we are pretty remotely located in Rhode Island, but Rhode Island is a densely populated state. So even though this looks like it's like, in the middle of nowhere, it's only about a mile until we have pretty high-end neighborhoods with, multi-million-dollar homes, and the ocean is only 5 miles away. So we've gotten a lot of pressure from neighbors. And so we've had to really figure out how to work with neighbors and work on a site that we focus on making high-quality compost at a large scale, but with consideration of the environment and neighbors' society as well. You'll see we are also a producer of produce. We grow rhubarb. We have a small orchard, garlic, and mixed herbs. Very small scale. This is a New England-sized farm compared to South Dakota, but a farm nonetheless. And compost makes a great addition to farms. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So the path to starting a new operation is going to be a little different for each person, but for us, the first step was finding a good location. I'm just going to go through the steps and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper into each step here. The second one is to really look at local and state regulations. Third step is, this is maybe one of the most important ones, is community outreach and education. The fourth step is to continually educate yourself. There's policy changes all the time. There's image changes of like how compost is seen in the public. There's different styles and different equipment and machinery, and just keeping up to date on that. And then really thinking about your site and how things are working for your site. It is very tailored, specific to your land. So these are kind of the steps I've been uncovering as I start a new operation. It's really neat to have fresh eyes after growing up in the industry for so long to now having this second site and starting fresh. So location, this is a really, really big consideration. I'm hoping a lot of you listening have a big parcel of land already and are, honing in on where you're going to put your operation. But if you're in the very beginning stages of looking for a site, this was the piece of property I just bought in Connecticut. And it was something where I walked on, I just knew it was right. I drove down a half-mile dirt driveway. I think you guys can see my little cursor here. I drove down this little dirt driveway, which is a good half-mile. There's actually a weigh station already there. It was a graveling operation, so they were extracting gravel here. I've always wanted a weigh station at my current facility, so that was really exciting. And then it was just a big flat area of gravel. So I was like, wow, this is going to be perfect for making compost on. And this is about 14 acres right here. And then it was surrounded, it's a 241 acre piece of property. So it has a lot of buffer land, over 220 acres of buffer land with neighbor buffers. So wow, that was an amazing site location. I don't know if I could come up with anything more ideal than that. Very different than my current location, but some similarities. And one of the main things to think about if you're going into compost, not only taking in yard materials and like hay and things like that, but also food scraps, which I highly recommend doing, manure, other sort of nitrogen-rich inputs. Thinking about wind direction is very important, where that prevailing wind is going to be headed. So for us, our wind direction is generally headed this way. And this site was perfect for that because it's headed into a 22,000 acre state forest. So if we ever do have some equipment breakdown or we can't turn that pile fast enough and there's an occasional odor, it's not blowing into a neighborhood. The odors are blowing into a forest, which is really actually good at absorbing odors. Also citing in terms of your elevation, it's way better to be lower in a valley because odors tend to settle down rather than being up high where your odors are going to go down off the site and settle down below you into other areas. So that was a great kind of thing that happened on this property. What else is important? Thinking about waterways. So this is very close to a body of water. So I'm going to really need to do good protections to prevent any runoff water from this site from going into this body of water. But that's pretty easy to do. We're going to put in a little retention pond here, some plantings around it, and be monitoring constantly for that. What else about the land? And thinking about truck traffic. So you're going to have trucks coming in and out to bring materials. You want to make sure that's not putting a lot of pressure on the neighborhood, or what do the roads look like around you, and your proximity to feedstocks. That's a really good thing to think about with your location is, for me, this is within 20 miles of two large casinos, which are going to be producing a lot of food scraps. So we're in some talks about being the recipient of the leftover food and wasted food at those facilities. There's a lot of tree trimming happening in timber in this area, so I'll get some wood chips. There's no leaf facilities even, so we will be taking in, we're in New England, there's a lot of leaves every fall that come down. So we'll be taking those in, and a lot of horse farms, so we'll be taking manure and bedding. It's a kind of exciting location for that. And it's about 40 minutes from my current operation, so we can, it's not that far. But yeah, so that's the location piece. And again, if you have a piece and you have specific questions you want to share with me, I'm happy to look at your piece of property and say, ooh, did you think about this or that? Because there's a lot to think about. This is me the first time looking out at the property. This is like a backfield that's there and just feeling that connection to it, like, wow, this is it. This is a great second location. And I ended up camping out. This was the morning after camping out there, being like, yep, this is it. This is where we're going to do it. All right, the next step is the not as fun part is the local and state regulations. Just so you know, I'm 8 months into permitting at the moment. Connecticut is a challenging state for opening a compost operation. That is why this will be the first large-scale compost operation in Connecticut. Rhode Island, we actually also have the only large-scale compost operation in Rhode Island as well. And when I say that, I mean a compost operation that takes in the putrescibles, the food scraps and the manures as well. There are some yard material compost facilities. But this isn't, you're not meant to see what this says, but just so you get a sense, these are the different departments I need to work with, the process of how I get through to permitting. I'm working with 5 state DEP departments, and then 2 town departments, and they're kind of in a consecutive order. It's I've only gotten through 1 so far, but I'm getting there. So understanding the process is really important for your area. Hopefully it's not as cumbersome in South Dakota. This is me. I went to the Connecticut DEEP, the Department of Environment and protection. And I looked at other proposals for compost operations. Really, they didn't have much. They had a pilot program but they had a wood chipping facility that was sort of similar. So I wanted to see what they were looking at that they were happy with in terms of operations manuals and applications. So I spent a day there in a big office building and dug in deep. But yeah, so just asking around on what that looks like and feeling out your town is really, really important step to this. This is, again, I think the most important part is the community outreach part. So this is me in July. I had a public hearing for the town of Sterling where this new facility is going to be, because there was starting to be a lot of chatter about what this was going to be. There was so many miscommunications of people, like that kind of like telephone game. So people thought we were, I don't know, processing septic or wastewater treatment or some kind of, scary thing. And so I was there to answer questions and really listen. And it went from being really an upset crowd at the beginning to kind of rallying and being like, when can we buy this compost? And do we get a discount if we live here? And excitement about it. It was really, really neat to watch. But just being really transparent has been my strategy of what we're doing, and also having, we had a farm tour at our current farm. So anybody from the town could come and see what we're doing, that I live in the middle of it. It's a great place to live and work. It takes the scariness out of it, because I'm not sure if it's the same with South Dakota, but in Connecticut, it's considered a solid waste facility, and that just triggers like alarms for people of that sounds scary. So, and the main questions that you're going to get are about odors. So being able to answer how to mitigate odors is really important. Your strategies for doing that. Traffic was a big one. People are concerned about water contamination. So being able to answer how you're addressing that. Yeah, just being transparent. And it was really, really key. And then I've continued to hold courses about what we're doing, and the excitement of compost has just been really great. I also have a lot of this stuff on YouTube. If you wanted to use these for your audience, they're just out there free to use. So this might actually be helpful, this webinar. And then continually educating yourself. I mentioned this a little bit, but there's so much information out there. The way Melissa found me was actually through No-Till Growers, this great farm association. I was on a podcast that she was listening into. And there's so much good information on YouTube and podcasts about making compost at large scale. This is actually my farm. This was No-Till Growers did a video about our farm last summer. Very detailed and in depth. There is a link to it on our website, like homepage, that you could watch. You get a lot of good information. I really like this composting handbook. It's like they call it the Holy Bible of compost, and I recommend delving into that. It's thick. It's like maybe 900 pages, more like a a very academic book, but super helpful and can help you answer questions when your neighbors have them. I also host a podcast called The Composter, where I interview composters around the world. You get so much great information by talking to other composters. I've learned a ton, and I think listeners have learned a real lot. And just going and visiting other compost operations I've learned so much that way, of things I do and don't want to do, mistakes that have been made on other sites that we can avoid, and then like great practices that we want to adopt. And just seeing it really helps to soak it in and understand like how you can envision that on your own land. So I highly recommend that. And then there's great compost conferences around this coming week, and it's a little late in the game, but Monday, there's the US Compost Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a week-long deep dive. There's science, technology, meet other composters. There's tours of the Arizona's compost facilities. You get a demo day where you get to see all the different equipment. The equipment's always changing. This industry is exciting and growing and changing. And so I really, really recommend diving into all the ways that you can learn out there. All right, and then getting into your specific site. So thinking about what feedstocks you're going to have in your area, how you want to treat them, what that recipe is going to look like, how the flow is going to be on your piece of property, and and you also need a marketing strategy. I don't even have that in here, but who do you plan to sell this to? Is it just for your own farm? Is it for, the town? Is it for you're going to be bagging? Are you going to be selling it wholesale? Think about what you want this to look like, and then really think about setting up your site for the most efficiency for that. So for us, this is a really basic model, but we call it the staging area. So that's where this bedding from the zoo was just dumped. We keep a stockpile of carbon material. That's bedding, leaves, wood chips, that we just always have, so that when we get our nitrogen-rich materials in, we can make a pad with our carbon materials and like a nest, and dump the nitrogen materials into that nest of carbon and add more carbon in. You're always going to want a good carbon to nitrogen ratio of 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen if you're doing a nitrogen-based compost. So you can just imagine how much carbon you need on hand. I don't know a lot about the resources in South Dakota. I imagine that there's horse farms and maybe some corn production and soy, and there's going to be byproducts from that. There's probably other things I'm not thinking about, but there's always in an area a way to make a good compost by thinking about the ingredients in the area, the resources, tapping into that, and thinking about a basic recipe of 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. We then have the turning area, where once we mix up that right recipe, we then can turn that compost, mix it in thoroughly, and then this is our basic batch that we're going to work with. And then you have this 4th maturing mesophilic composting area, where once you've gone through this hot thermophilic phase you really want to get that thermophilic phase. We try to aim for that thermophilic phase, which means hot composting. Thermo is hot. For about 3 months is what we're aiming for, so that any plant pathogens or weed seeds are sterilized in that process. So you're going to be spreading something good on fields later on. So that process does take a while, and the way to get those thermophilic conditions are to have that right carbon to nitrogen ratio, making sure you have air in the system. That's one thing I see a lot of when there's mistakes. A lot of times there's not enough air. And we get our air in just by the payloader bucket mixing. There's other ways to do it now with forced aeration, aerated static piles, lots of different options, but we just do it the old-fashioned way with a bucket loader. And then making sure you have a good moisture content. I think South Dakota is similar to here, where we do get rain. Fortunately, it's a lot easier to compost. I say, yeah, maybe not. A lot easier to compost when you get about 1 inch of rain a week. That's what the pile really wants. So if you can't get that consistently, having a way to add water onto that pile, which we actually do have built in. So the water runs off the site and goes into this pond, and we can pump that back onto our piles, which is really, really handy. Some people have a tanker truck with spray that they can spray water on the piles if that's needed. It's harder to, when you get too much rain, it's hard to keep the piles from getting too much water, but you can control water intake with different options. So once you've got that hot pile that there's no weed seeds in it, there's no plant pathogens, those microbes have just had the perfect environment to naturally heat up through their metabolic processes and break things down. Then the pile starts to cool down, goes into that mesophilic condition. So you want to have a pile for that your mesophilic composting pile. And then that takes a little while, about 3 months in our system. Everyone's got a different system. They can speed things up or slow things down. I like a long process, and I'll explain that why. But so 3 months, you'll have this mesophilic composting. The temperatures gradually decrease. You start to get more and more life in that pile. So at the beginning, it's just those thermophilic bacteria. During the mesophilic conditions, you start to get more fungi. You start to get microarthropods and all sorts of little nematodes and microscopic beings. It gets really diverse then. And then once you get to this mature compost, it's ambient temperature, it's full of life. Just one handful will have billions and billions of microorganisms. And that's what you want to bring, that life into the soil. This is how we invigorate our soils. Think of all that life then feeding our plant roots. So this is what we're doing. We're creating this amazing substance to feed our soil. So bring pride into it because it is an amazing process. And part of that pride is keeping contaminants out of the compost. And so being aware of that from the beginning, thinking about each thing coming in, not as a waste material that you're handling, but as a resource, as an ingredient to make this amazing thing that we're going to give back to the land. So that right away, you don't want to bring in trash. You don't want plastic or any of those things that could come in when people are unconsciously separating materials to compost. I've been seeing a lot of poorly made compost lately, and I really want to up the game for everybody. So if you're just getting in, be conscious about that. What's going into these piles? So avoid the inorganic litter. And then I did hear Melissa say that there's been some concern about compost being made that is then phytotoxic, can only be used on grasslands. That is becoming more and more of a concern because there's about 4 herbicides that no longer break down during the composting process that are sprayed on basically hay. And so what's happening is people are either composting hay or horse manure that the horses have eaten hay that was contaminated with this herbicide. And then, through the composting process, it doesn't break down. And then you end up with a compost that you can't use in your vegetable garden or to grow anything other than grasses. That's not where we want to head in this industry. In my opinion, that's a problem with the herbicide industry when it can't break down like that. But you want to be really careful on your site not to take those herbicide-laden grasses in or manure in. It does seem to be coming a lot from the horse industry, from the horse manure and bedding. So we have a really strict policy of, we do take in horse manure and bedding, but you have to source where your hay came from and let us know and make sure that those grasslands were not sprayed with the 4 herbicides that are causing these problems. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. We do have a good test about 6 months into the process before we screen our compost, which I didn't even talk about screening and sales. We didn't get that far yet. We just do a very simple, it's called a plant bioassay, where we take, it's also called planting peas. It's very simple, but we take a tray, we plant pea seeds, and if they germinate and they're green and nice, you don't have a problem with the herbicides. If they germinate and they're yellow and furled, you've got contamination with that herbicide, and it doesn't take much. I've heard that the amount of a tablespoon in the equivalent of an Olympic-sized pool is enough to contaminate a batch of compost. But making sure you're up on testing your compost, so that you're not wasting a lot of time. If you do have a problem, then screening it is very expensive and time consuming. And so you could avoid that. Fortunately, I've never had this problem with the herbicides. I think we're really, really careful with stuff coming in, but many composters have. And then you need to make sure you separate that out, and that compost is only used for grass. So hopefully that's an industry problem that we can solve in the next few years because it's a real concern. So after that material's cool and great and ready to spread, you've got your screening area. We have a little screening area over here. I don't have a picture of my screener, but you can see that on my website if you wanted to see it. And then our bulk sales area. We do now bag some and sell it. Most of our stuff is sold bulk though to landscapers and farmers and home gardeners. So, but yeah, thinking about how you're going to sell that at the end, what equipment you're going to need for loading, if you want to get a bagging machine, all really important for thinking about your large scale operation. I feel like I went really, really fast. So this is our new site in Connecticut. I'm just still in the envisioning, dreaming stage, but I'm picturing the trucks coming in this way. We have our area where leaves will get dropped off here, and then we'll mix the pile here. turn. These are the turning, the thermophilic piles. This is the mesophilic area. And then we put our mature compost here for sales and then out the door. So kind of been thinking about the flow of that and how that's going to work. Really important to think about where your rainwater is going to go. So this has actually been changed since I envisioned this. We have water coming just off the site and through our mature compost, which is already stable and good, going into this water retention pond, which already existed. Water coming off the site and through these more active piles is going to be accumulated into a pond down here and then slowly infiltrated in so that it doesn't get into groundwater. So that it's a big design we're doing with the state to make sure the water is going to be clean that comes off the site. And actually, like, water going through the mature compost does get cleaner as it goes through. So this is exciting when you think about putting that compost onto your fields and that, the water going through the fields that way and getting cleansed as it goes down. That's our goal. But there's this little middle process while it's still active that you have to be really conscious of what's happening with water runoff. And it's really simple to when you have, I don't know what the bedrock material is in South Dakota, but here it's sand and gravel, and it's easy to mold, making berms and swales with just our equipment. And then after a rain, it's important to monitor to make sure those berms and swales are still working and the water is going where you want it to go. Lots of things to think about, but none of it's rocket science and all basic stuff, but you really have to address these little management issues. I kind of went fast. Let's see how we're doing for time. Oh yeah, it's been half an hour. But this is my dad who started this back in 1977 with this vision of really enlivening the soil. And this is our mission. This is like our guiding force of how we're going to make decisions, is thinking about, are we enlivening the soils of New England? And this is a classic. My dad holding this handful of soil, he always said to me, in one handful of soil, there's more life in one handful of this compost than there are humans on the planet. And I just grew up hearing that and like envisioning, wow, there's like a whole universe in this little handful of soil that we are the stewards of. And how amazing to create this much life to bring to our soils, to make our food that much more nutritious, our lands that much more resilient to absorbing rainwater when we get these rain events, and also holding on to moisture when we have droughts, and just how amazing this process is. So just really considering the future, and that's what he did. I mean, he stuck with it all these years when compost was like, people rolled their eyes at him, 25, 30 years ago. And now here we are, this industry is booming, and this is what we need to do to restore our soils. So it's really exciting, and we can do a really great job at a big scale. So I really encourage you to get into this, get your site set up, really be thoughtful about it, thoughtful about your inputs, and reach out to the other composters in the industry. It's a really friendly industry. So we have a lot to share. Let me see if I can stop the sharing.
We did end up with a couple questions. Tara was wondering, so you are buying these scraps or byproducts, going trucking services, or how does that do it? Are you using trucking services, or how does that all work?
That's a great question. So in the early days, we were going out and collecting materials. My dad had a dump truck. He would go out and muck out stalls. He'd go down to the docks and get fish scraps. He'd go to the grocery stores and get things. Now everything is brought here. We don't have our own trucks. It's just like the grocery store has a contract with a local trucker. The trucker brings the stuff here. The zoo manure that just got brought, the zoo has their own trucking company that they use to send it down here. And the way we have it set up, we don't pay for the materials to come in. We charge half as much as the landfill would have charged. So it's a savings to the people creating this, their byproduct generally, but it's actually income for us, because it does have a cost to manage it. So that's a really great question. It seems to be different in different areas, but yeah, that's how it works here.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we have one zoo in South Dakota. So the zoo thing is just like crazy. It just blows my mind. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Um, Greg was wondering, how does the lowly earthworm play a part in your compost production once you get to the mesophilic stage and final stockpile? Do
It's
you add worms at any stage?
I don't add worms. So during that initial thermophilic stage, worms can't survive through that. It's much too hot for them. I'm just always amazed though at the final product that we're selling. We always find worms in it. They just come from, I think it's like if you build it, they will come kind of thing. But we don't add worms in. And but when you add that compost, even if it doesn't have worms when it's finished and cool, and you add it into your garden, it's a great habitat for them. There's a lot of material for them to consume. And yeah, so there's so much information about worms right now because there are some now invasive worms that are not great for things. There's the snake worm, and so we get a lot of people making sure we don't have worms in it, and then we get people that want worms in it. So you have to just be careful of, how you're addressing that. Like red wigglers are amazing, but these Asian worms that are these snake worms are not great. So having that mesophilic process, I mean the thermophilic process, to make sure you're actually killing the eggs of the invasive ones is really important for a lot of people to hear. But then wanting to create a habitat for other worms to live in and thrive is also really important. So it's the double-edged sword. Long-winded answer.
Okay. Greg was also wondering, does your customer base require microbiology test reports to show distribution of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes? Do you share this information with customers? Do you do this as a means of self-protection to tote the product quality and liability?
Great question again. I would say like it's a very small percentage of customers that are asking for that, but there are some, and I love those ones because they're an educated customer and I can talk to them for days. But yes, if they want it, I will provide it. I use the Soil Food Web Lab. I think it's in Oregon. I'm happy to share that. I don't know it off the top of my head, the contact for that. But I also do a lot of in-house, just if that person that's really a customer that's really interested in that wants to come in and we can take a little sample of the compost. We do one dropper full on the slide and look at it under the microscope, and that puts people's minds at ease to see how much life is in there. And there's a lot of conflicting information about what is the right ratio of fungi to bacteria. And it really depends on what you're growing, what your goals are. It's going to be different in an orchard versus a row crop. And like some things like broccoli don't even want fungi in that. They want a more bacterially rich, compost added in there. So knowing what that is and how to tailor that, like if we use our compost, which is a little more bacterially rich than fungi rich, and add some wood chips into it, that's perfect for an orchard. So knowing how to talk to the customer too about how to tweak it for their product is for what they're growing is really important. But it takes a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of there's this microbiology and agroecology and learning about row crops and soil health. There's a lot there, but that's what makes it exciting for me. Any other questions in there, Melissa? I hope.
Tara was wondering, how do you figure out your pricing for your finished product?
That's a tricky one. I can't compare it to other composts around because like our state makes a compost, it's pretty poor quality, it has trash in it, and they charge $30 a cubic yard. Ours right now is at 82 a cubic yard, so totally different price point. It sounds so expensive to people, but it's a different product altogether. So the way I had to figure it out was I considered all my costs. I figured out how much it costs us to make a yard of compost, and then I had to mark that up accordingly to what you would, mark up things for wholesale. So I just had to work with my own numbers, nothing related to the market. And the reason I'm starting a second site is because we consistently sell out of each batch of compost. And, we usually have these gaps in between when the new batch is ready and the old one is gone. So I knew it was time to make more. The price didn't seem to have anything to do with it. And it's rare that you can get Like a cubic yard is a pickup truck full. It's rare that you can get a pickup truck full of anything for $82 right now. Try to get lumber, you're going to spend $1,000. So I try to put it, that perspective for people. And it's that amount of life. How many beings are you getting in a pickup truck full of that compost? It's unfathomable. That's another great question, though.
Not seeing any more questions come through. I think you've blown all their mind. They're like trying to process it all.
There's a lot. There's a lot. It's a lifetime working with compost. I love it.
Greg has came up with one. How long is the process in days or months from the start of the thermophilic pile to the sale date?
It's a 1 year is what we are going for. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer because I'm really judging the maturity based on a couple factors. The smell, I want to smell earthy and nothing like compost like it originally started. I want it to have, so I do like a respiration test for carbon dioxide. I want to know that that life is breathing in there. So they're, I do a carbon dioxide test, and then we do test for ammonia. If it tests, a little bit higher for ammonia, it's not finished. But generally that's 1 year. Sometimes it's up to 14 months, something like that. But we have a slower process. And I said I was going to talk about this, so thank you for sparking that. But I find that the longer and slower the process, the more that the more that life has time to metabolize any problems that could have been in there. It's really rare these days to have food that doesn't have some sort of herbicide in it, or leaves that have something. And if you give the microbes enough time to process it, they're really good at breaking that down into just elements, and then it's neutralized. So I find the rushed compost, when they say they can do it in 30 days, that's where you get some problems happening. Not always, but I just like a long, slow process. We end up with more life in the compost at the end. What's the rush? So yeah, make something great. Anything else in there?
Wait to see if Greg comes up with it. Greg's been coming up with some really good questions. I'm seeing if he has any more. See if it sparks something.
Yeah. Oh, we could talk a little bit about pests. I'm actually looking outside. There's 2 seagulls that came in with that zoo manure. You probably wouldn't have that in South Dakota. We have seagulls are kind of like our flying rats. But people are concerned about rats. If you have like a wide open space, it's generally not a problem because they'd have to like come in and there's too many predators. I found that leaving some dead trees around or some posts for hawks and eagles to come in really prevents any rodent problems, because they're just so easily picked off that way. And making sure any of your nitrogen-rich feedstocks like food scraps are really put away at the end of the day, so there's no food showing on the outside of that pile. You want to make sure it's just leaves and wood chips or whatever kind of carbon source you're using, so that they're just not attracting coyotes or I'm wondering what the pests would be in your area. But it's really pretty simple to manage pests once you know what they're looking for. You think about what's driving them to come in and just preventing those conditions. So flies is something that we're aware of in the summertime, making sure there's no standing water puddles around, and that we're making lots of habitat for birds to eat those flies. So we encourage the barn swallows and the bluebirds and putting up birdhouses and planting hedgerows of elderberry that are, bringing the birds in for the food and the habitat and helping us with the insects.
Very cool. Sounds like even regenerative, kind of using nature to help nature.
Oh, it's the
pretty
best
cool.
way to do it. Then it's not
Greg did.
Yeah.
I say Greg did come up with another one. We have to cover our compost windrows in South Dakota to reduce moisture loss. It's very hard to keep the pile moist enough during our long drought periods. It looks like you don't cover your piles during the whole process.
Yeah, so I've actually just started covering them for the opposite reason in the winter time. Just the finish pile will cover, it's called a compost tex, TEX cover. It sounds like I don't have experience with what you're dealing with. Ours is because we get too much moisture in the winter time. And I don't want that soggy pile in the springtime when I'm trying to sell it because it's been getting rain and snow all winter. But those are great covers because they're almost like it's almost like a dryer sheet type of material, but thicker, and they repel water, but they also are breathable. So and it traps the water inside, but you still are getting air. You don't want to suffocate your pile. There's life in there, so you need the air. So I really like those covers. I'm curious to see. I don't have experience with them in South Dakota, but the other nice thing is they're unlike a tarp, they don't blow off because it's a cloth material and the air can get through some. Um, but yeah, I'm curious, are you using tarps or is it a covered like structure? How is it covered for you guys for water retention? I imagine it's a tarp, but I imagine that would blow off. Um, so I don't have a great answer for you, but I don't have to cover them here because we get a lot of moisture here. Sounds like I should just have a conversation with Craig.
Tara was wondering, when you're getting your scraps from like casinos and such, are they including the meats and such? Oh, or just vegetables? What is your criteria for food scrap locations?
Great question. Yes. So for us, we have that putrescibles permit, so we can take in any meats, cheeses, dairy, any of that stuff can come in with the food scraps. And so the criteria is only food scraps. We don't take in paper napkins or the biodegradable, compostable packaging. The only reason for that is, I guess it's two things, but we do have an OMRI listed compost, so our compost is used for organic farmers to can use it, and the OMRI standards require that we don't take in those biodegradable plastics and packaging. Um, and then the other thing is those are too easy to confuse for the customer. Like that napkin looks like trash, so then I'll throw in my plastic cup. But if it's just food scraps, it seems to be easier for people to separate that out. And for us, it doesn't matter if it's meat or cheese or veggies or bread or whatever it is. We consider it a nitrogen source, even though it's mixed. And it's a great resource. It's just food, wasted food. So, and I'm careful to say, I try not to use waste as a term, like, because I don't use food waste. I might say wasted food, but I'll say food scraps or wasted food instead of food waste, because I always want there to be this reverence of these are ingredients going into this compost. We're not waste handlers. We are making a great product with, unfortunately, our society's a little sick that we have waste, but we can make it higher and better. So we try not to even call it waste. Anything else from Tara, Greg?
No, no,
Okay.
they're processing,
Yeah. Yeah.
which you can certainly reach out to her anytime at her website, earthcarefarm.com, if
Yeah.
you have any more questions.
Yep.
And she's
And I highly recommend listening to the podcast, The Composter, not for my own, I don't get anything from more listeners or anything, but just it's really neat to hear from all the other composters around. Um, and yeah, just explore. There's so much out there.
well, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I will let everybody get on with their day. Thank you for joining us today, Janie. We
Thanks.
appreciate your time and knowledge and passion in commercial composting. Um,
It's a gift.
I learned a lot. It was really cool.
Thanks. Thanks. I love it.
This webinar was funded under a conservation collaboration agreement between the Natural Resource Conservation Service and the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association to promote sustainable agriculture practices and environmental stewardship. Its contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the USDA or NRCS. Again, I am Melissa Niles, Urban Ag Liaison for the South Dakota Specialty Producers. Please visit us at sdspecialtyproducers.org to view our upcoming events, find producers, and become a member. Thank you, Jayne. You have a wonderful Thursday.
Thanks. I plan to. Hope to see you soon.
Yes.